Hi everyone, my name is James. Welcome to King's Fine Woodworking. And today we're going to wrap up this basic woodworking bench. We're just going to jump right in where we left off last time and begin with the construction of the drawers. With that done and the pocket holes done, it's time to turn our attention back to the drawer. What we need to do is assemble the drawer in the orientation that it is going to be in. And we need to be careful to go ahead and line the thing up perfectly. My buddy Mike brought his son Chance to help us out today. So once we get it in the exact orientation, we're going to put it together with a parallel clamp, and that's going to lock it in place and allow us to put the pocket screws in without anything shifting. I know that Craig sells specialty clamps for this purpose, but I've never had much use for them. I always find if I just use a regular clamp or a parallel clamp to hold the joints together, they stay great. So Mike is tapping it into final position. We do want everything exactly flush. The project's just going to look much better, and the drawer is going to open and close better and everything if we take our time to get this just right. With that clamp down, Chance is going to put some pocket screws in the holes for us, and Mike is going to screw them together. I like to use a drill with a clutch on it in order to sink these pocket screws. That way I can set the clutch to a certain setting. On my drill it's about 11. That's enough to bottom out the screw and not enough to drill all the way through. And we're just going to repeat that same process on the other side. And the cool thing about building it in this orientation with pocket screws is that board that has the pocket screws is the front of the drawer. And on the front of that goes the actual drawer front, which we'll be cutting later, so it will completely hide those pocket screws. And the other pocket screws are in the back, and those will never be seen either. So this is a nice way to put a drawer together and have your fastening system completely hidden. Then we're going to proceed to cut the bottoms of the drawers. Here again, I'm just using 3/4 inch ply because it's what we have. And I'm going to use the same jig that we used before in order to get a center line marked all the way around the perimeter so that we can screw this down on the bottom of the drawer body itself. So you might be thinking that just simply screwing this drawer bottom onto the bottom of the drawer body is really weak, but that just isn't true. We actually have 100-pound rated ball bearing drawer slides. So that's kind of the limit that those can hold anyway, and those are really heavy duty slides. I'm going to end up with probably 8 to 12 screws around the perimeter here, and each of those screws has about a 60-pound pull-out strength. So even if I just have 8 screws, 8 times 60 pounds a piece, that's 480 pounds. So it would take a minimum of 480 pounds for the bottom to pull off. That's almost 5 times the strength that the drawer slides can handle anyway. So screwing a drawer bottom onto the bottom of your drawer assembly is perfectly fine. And because we believe in overkill, we're going to go ahead and add glue to it as well. And I would suspect the glue is probably strong enough all by itself, even without screws. Now we want to talk about a technique of squaring the drawer body. So basically the sides and the front and back probably aren't square after putting them together with pocket screws. They could be, but they might not be. So what we want to do is we want to drill down on one side only. We want to line it up perfectly flush and drill down and put screws on one side only. I have taken steps to make sure that the drawer bottom I've cut is perfectly square. Now once this side has been screwed down fully and it's secure, then I'm going to unclamp it and I'm going to flip this drawer body around, rotate it 180 degrees. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and apply a parallel clamp very loosely. And the parallel clamp is just going to squeeze the bottom, the drawer body part, into perfect alignment with the drawer bottom itself. And that's how we square the whole drawer body. One last thing you might have noticed is I never mentioned what the height of the sides and the front and back are going to be. We talked about how to get the length exactly of the front and back, and the height is really no big deal. I measured the height of the opening, and I just made sure my drawer was about 1 inch short. And that's really kind of variable. It's up to you. You can make the height of the walls of the drawer, the depth of the drawer, anything you want. It can be a 1/2 inch short, 1 inch short, 2 inches short, whatever you like. It's not a critical measurement. The only real critical measurement are going to be the front and back. Even the sides, the measurement's not critical because your drawer body doesn't necessarily have to extend all the way to the back. Back at the bench, we're going to go ahead and secure the lower shelf. My daughter Sai is going around and pre-drilling all of the holes for the screws, and Mike's son Chance is going to go ahead and screw them in. This is a fantastic chore to give to a little one to help out in your shop. And if they use an impact driver, there is really no torque or very, very little torque on the wrist, so there's no risk of danger. Just make sure they wear whatever safety gear is appropriate, including safety glasses, things like that. But it's just a great way to get your kids engaged if that's something that you're inclined to do. Of course, every parent will have to make the decision whether or not they want their child in the shop, but this is a good starting point, and it's actually how I got my girls started with some of the simpler projects like this so many years ago. While Chance was busy putting down the shelf, his dad Mike was busy sanding the drawers, and now it's time to put them in. So we like to pull the slides out just a little bit and insert the drawer, make sure it fits. And if you take a look here, my total height looks like I chose to go about 1/2 inch below the top of the surface. And this gives me space to put a spacer underneath, and that's a good idea if the drawer ever sags, if there's a whole lot of weight. We don't want the drawer to drag on the bottom, and this spacer gets it up a little bit. I think I used a 1/8 inch spacer on each side. And so we're going to pull the drawer out just a little bit. We don't want it out much because we want it to be resting firmly on that spacer. And we want to make sure we have the slide pulled out flush with the front. So Mike's going to set up and pre-drill a hole. And for this, we're going to use the same thing, the self-centering VIX bit. And ideally, you want to put it into the round circles in the drawer slides first. And if you mess up on those, then we can go to the horizontal slots. So put the hole in first, and then we'll follow that up with a screw. Now, if you don't have a ton of experience with a screw gun, you either want to go real slow or even put them in by hand with a screwdriver. And if you notice here, Mike actually free spun that, and that screw has stripped out. That happens. It happens all the time, and it's really no big deal. But we don't necessarily want to rely on that screw for strength. So we're going to put one on the other side, and then we're going to go back to our first side, and we're just going to pull it out a tiny bit further, and we're going to put another screw in the horizontal slot. It's always best to have the drawer pulled out as small of an amount as possible. That way it stays flat on the bottom and stays parallel. Now, I ordinarily wouldn't put two screws this close together on the drawer unless one strips out, in which case it's perfectly normal to do that. Now, if you manage to strip out a whole bunch of them, you could simply go up to a slightly bigger size screw and fix the problem that way. And that last screw worked great for him, so we're going to pull the drawer out a little bit more and put the next screw in. And we just keep going in this fashion, pulling the drawer out further and further and putting screws. And I don't know if you probably can't see it from this video clip, but the drawer is designed, it telescopes in just a way to leave openings inside of there to get screws right at the very back. And that's really all there is to it to putting one of these drawers in. I didn't really show it in the video, but we jumped back and forth left to right to left to right with each successive screw as we went deeper in the sequence. So this is a drawer front that we have cut, and Sai has marked it out, a location for us, and this is showing us where we are going to put our drawer pull, the handle that allows us to open the drawer. I like to do this at a drill press or perhaps on a table where I can control the drill and make sure it goes in perpendicular. These are really just marker holes at this point to show us where the handle's going to go. And now we're going to go ahead and mount this drawer front onto the drawer body itself. There are a number of ways to do it to align it. One way is you could use double-sided tape on the front of the drawer body and then align the drawer front in the orientation that you want. I'm using these Rockler clamps. They're clamps that are designed to hold a drawer front in place. I didn't really want this video to get too long by showing you the step-by-step of how to do that, because I have covered that in a number of other videos, one of which is our extreme miter station build, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below. So to hold these two flat pieces of plywood together, I just use an 1¼ inch screw. You can use the GRK screws, which I ran out of, or you can use the Craig screws, which I'm using now. And you can see that's the orientation that I was trying to achieve. And now we're going to go ahead and take those two holes that Sai drilled on the drill press, and we're going to extend those all the way through the back piece of plywood, the drawer body itself, so that we can go ahead and mount the handles, the pulls for this drawer. And these are some inexpensive drawer pulls that Mike picked out when he was at the big box store getting his plywood. It's a good idea to have these handy when you're installing your drawers, so you can go ahead and measure and mount these right away. Of course, drawer pulls aren't necessary. You could just use a block of wood if you prefer. I want to take a moment to mention our Facebook group. We have a Kingsfine Woodworking community group on Facebook. It's a closed group. There are thousands of woodworkers in the group, and we only accept woodworkers there. And if you ever need additional help in a project you're building like this one or something else, you can get online and you can ask. You can post pictures of what you're doing. And we have woodworkers of every skill level, from intermediate all the way up to expert, and quite a few beginners as well. And you can always get your questions answered. It's a friendly environment, and it's also a place to share your projects and share your ideas. I'm on there every day. I probably answer thousands of questions a month. So if you're interested, there is a link to that Facebook group in the description below. Putting a lot of screws around the perimeter to hold the top on, because once this goes into the garage or workshop, a lot of times you'll pick it up and move it around with the drawers and the shelf below fully loaded. You might be picking up on this top with 500 pounds or so below it, and those screws have better hold tight, otherwise you might rip the top off of the project. So that's one area where I like to make sure we use lots of screws. Now we just take some measurements to make sure it's spaced, the overhang is spaced uniformly. And then we're going to go ahead and screw it in all the way around. Once again, the little angle jig comes in pretty handy here. I need to say a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. This whole 16-week free online woodworking course was actually your idea, and it's your support that makes this possible. In fact, most of the projects that I do are recommendations from my viewers, and the majority of those come from my Patreon subscribers. So thank you again to all of you guys. Without you, we couldn't have this channel. With that done, we can slide the drawers back in place. If you've bought drawer slides before at some of the woodworking stores or even the big box stores, you'll know that for a quality set of ball bearing slides, you might pay 15 or 20 bucks. But if you check out the link I put below, you'll find that you can get these for about $5 a pair. So Maya's cutting one more piece to go on the back of our workbench here. And this is going to serve two purposes. It is going to prevent any little components that we set on the shelf from being slid off of the back. But more importantly than that, it is actually going to add the last amount of rack resistance that we need to strengthen up this table. Now we don't have to worry about putting hundreds or even 1,000 pounds on the surface of this table and having it rack from side to side. This board is going to lock that in, so that will not happen. And Sai is going to be screwing this piece into the legs with 3 long deck screws on each side. I reckon those shop dogs must love the sound of these tools, because they seem to be taking a pretty good nap. And she seems quite pleased with her work there. Alright, so we actually had a cherry board sitting in the shop. I've actually got a lot of odds and ends that I have left over from various projects, and we thought we'd go ahead and dress up this table a little bit. This part, of course, is totally optional, but I'll show you how we did it. So Maya had to joint that first edge because it was pretty rough on that side. This was a rough piece of lumber originally, but if you need to go to the store to pick up a piece, you can get a piece that just has a straight line rip on one side. And now she's just ripping the rest of it down into 2-inch strips. So Maya has a lot of skill and experience with the table saw, so she knows when she can use her hand close to the blade, and she knows when she can't. Sometimes the perspective that the camera has is a little bit skewed, and you might think her hand is too close to the blade when in fact it's not. But shop safety is a personal decision, and you need to make sure that whatever you're doing in the shop you feel safe with. Even if you need to use push blocks for every cut, then you need to do that. So it's kind of entirely up to you. The most important thing is never make a cut that you feel unsafe doing. There's always a way that you can find to make a cut safer. Okay, so the reason we ripped those down is because we're going to put a border around the edge of our plywood just to make the top look a little bit nicer. So I like to hold it in place, trace it, and then cut it to the exact length that we need on the chop saw. And we're going to glue it in, and we're going to also use some pin nails to hold it in place. I'm just using a square or a straight edge to make sure that my board comes to be exactly flush with the front of the table, and then I'm going to put the pin nails in to kind of secure it while the glue dries. If you're not familiar with pin nailers, it's a really handy tool for all types of woodworking, and yes, especially fine woodworking. It's a nail that has no head, and it's a great way to secure things that otherwise are very tough to hold in place and wait for the glue to dry. And it's very easy to put just a tiny drop of putty over that tiny pin head, and you'll never see it on the finished project. And here we're going to measure and take a quick mark for the front piece. I always like doing this hold it on in place and trace method better than actually using a measuring tape, because I know it's exact and the chances for error are pretty slim. With practice and with using an extremely sharp pencil, you can get to the point where you can cut the pencil line in half and pretty much have the board end up at exactly the right length. Here again, we wanted to use glue and some pin nails to hold this in place. And it was about this point that I got to thinking. This is plenty strong if the table were stationary and never moved around. But I started thinking that maybe Mike is going to have this in his shop, and I don't know, maybe he's going to have a car transmission on that lower shelf or just some kind of crazy weight, and then he's going to try to pick up this tabletop from this lip, from this edge. And if he does that, I'm not so sure that the strength of the glue and the pin nails is going to be enough. So I decided I would mark out some equal spaces all the way across the top, pre-drill in some holes, and screw it in as well. I'm going to use some stainless steel finishing screws. They look really nice, and finishing screws have pretty small slender heads, so they don't stick out where they're so ugly, and I'll try to drive them down to where they're just flush with the surface. And maybe that'll give the piece a little bit of an industrial look, and it won't look too bad with the screws just sitting there. I don't think we want to go to the trouble of countersinking them and putting a plug or anything like that. And I think this is a good, attractive alternative, and it's a way for us to give a whole lot of strength to this piece of wood here in case somebody decides to pick up the table by that point. Now I think to dress the top out and make it look really good, we're going to put a chamfer around the top edge. And you'll have to forgive me if I'm being redundant here, but I couldn't remember if I mentioned it. But the plans for these are free, since this is part of our 16-week free online woodworking course, and there's a link to those in the description below in case you're interested. Yeah, I think that trim really dressed up the piece nicely. Unfortunately, now it's starting to look kind of pretty, so I think these corner gaps that don't have a plywood surface that's equal to the shelf are looking a little unsightly. So we thought we'd cut a couple of rectangles here and finish nail those in place. And just a little more sanding. We're going to sand off all of the milling marks and the stamps that are on the wood, so that when we put a lacquer finish over everything, it's going to look really good. We probably shouldn't have had Maya doing it because she's a perfectionist, and if we let her go, she'd be sending this whole project down to about 1,000 grit. But in the end, it turned out really nice. Mike was really happy, and he's got a great new workbench for his garage shop. Off camera, we applied a few coats of brush-on lacquer, and it was all done. I hope you enjoyed the project. Thanks for watching.